Anthony Alcoholic. Again, I'm from West Palm Beach, Florida. My friend Rifki asked me to speak tonight, and I'm always willing to be of service. It's the first time on a online meeting, so that's pretty cool. I definitely respect and support what you guys are doing here. That's awesome. So yeah, let's get started there. A little bit about what it was like, what happened, and what's going on now. My sobriety date is September 14th, 2017. So I'm coming up on 2 years. Pretty amazing stuff. I was born in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia, with an alcoholic mother and a normal father. From a very young age, I was introduced to AA. My mom was getting sober. So I was around the rooms. I've heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. I knew, at face value, about the program. Took me 29 years to figure out this is where I needed to be, and this is what the solution to my problem was. So, like I said, at a young age, I was told, that I was alcoholic and I had alcoholic tendencies. I always had that that need, that want to fit in. And that need and that want, landed me in some trouble early on. I was in 5th grade. I got arrested for vandalism because I wanted my peers, to like me. I wanted to fit in. So just some of the early on alcoholic, traits that I recall in my life. This was even before I'd taken a drink, and I don't necessarily remember my first drink. Somewhere in the 5th grade, in that area. But I remember the obsession that came after it. After that first drink, drugs are also a part of my story. I'll try and stick to alcohol. But after that first drink, it was like whatever I needed to do to get the next one, planning for the weekends. At that point it was stealing bottles, in cases out of people's garages from family members, climbing through my father's window and taking cash out of his drawer, to go have somebody else purchase me beer or dry goods. I would go to extreme extents from an early age to get, what I thought I needed, what made me feel okay. Just like the disease that it is, it's progressive. And, after, getting into middle school and high school, I was never really, a no guy. So if my peers or people that I looked up to, had something and were offering it up, I was all in. It quickly progressed. Throughout high school, I'm experimenting with other substances. Find myself constantly getting in trouble. Senior years when I had gotten expelled from high school for selling a green leafy alcohol substance. In which case I remember this so vividly because this is the only time in my life that I recall seeing my mother cry. And, an experience like that for a normal person, I don't really know because I'm not a normal person, might be enough to make them stop drinking, seeing the heartbreak of a family member. But for somebody like myself, it was not, it progressed. Just after that happened, after I got expelled, one of my best friends was struggling with this disease and hung himself, and again, an experience that may be enough for somebody of, the normie, as they say, to realize that, this is a deadly and dangerous thing. But for people like myself, it wasn't, it just, fueled my alcoholism. I used it as an excuse. I'm going through this tough time, leave me alone. Anything I could do to get away with what I was doing, I would feed into. All throughout college or the time that I spent in a college town, rarely going to college, I continued to have run-ins with the law. It's funny, like I think about, for so long, I couldn't admit that I was an alcoholic, that alcohol wasn't the problem. It wasn't until years later, I'm looking back on all these situations, totaled cars, arrests, people that I've harmed, and in every single situation, alcohol was involved. Amongst other things, but alcohol was always was the constant. Um, it was for somebody like me, like I don't see the problem being alcohol until I'm frankly until I'm ready to kill myself, till I'm out of money and I don't want to live anymore. So that came around the first time about 5.5 years ago, where I decided to go to treatment. Um, you know, Went, listened, didn't take any action. It's a program of action. Um, I thought I would catch this by osmosis, and that was not the case. Shortly thereafter, I go back out, in which case it gets worse. I do everything that I said I would never do. Moving on to hardest or harder and the hardest things that are out there. And again, somebody like me, I don't see the problem until I am contemplating suicide and flat broke and on my back. So it took another 3 years for me to reach that position again. And God willing, He gave me that bottom. He gave me what I needed to get where I'm at now. And I wouldn't change anything for the world. My experience is my own. I own it. And it's what got me where I'm at now. Sorry, my cat's trying to join in here. Back, everybody. So yeah, this time around, man, like I knew what didn't work. I knew that just going to meetings and being present and spitting verses out of the book wasn't going to cut it. I needed to take some action, and quite frankly, I stopped making decisions. I trusted the people. I believe at that point, that is when I turned my will and my life over, to a higher power. And at that time, it was the treatment and the people in treatment, working in treatment, and the people in the program that have come before me. That relationship has since evolved. But that's what worked for me early on. I remember being in Pennsylvania in detox, and I 9 days of detox, and my insurance was going to cut me out. And everybody, they suggested I pray about what to do. And, I prayed, and like the next day in the paper, and this is like the first experience, like the first spiritual experience I recall having. The next day in the paper, there's a cancer horoscope, and it says, "You're about to go on a journey you don't yet understand, but that's okay. Take it one day at a time." And I remember being blown away, and like I took that as my journey down here to South Florida. So I got on the plane, I came down here to South Florida, and at this point I was pretty willing, I was pretty beat up. I get into the treatment center down here, and the people are telling me to do this and that, listen to meditation, guided meditation tapes, because my mind was just crazy, I couldn't sleep. Pray, get a sponsor, get a home group. I took just about every suggestion that they gave me, and that was the difference between last time and this time. The willingness. I was beaten up enough to where I was ready to do anything. For like the last year of my active usage and drinking, I didn't want to be doing it. I didn't want to be continuing to be the person that I was. I just didn't know how to change. Like every day I would say, "This is it, I'm done." And I just didn't know. I wasn't informed, or I lacked to understand that this was the solution I needed. Which is funny, because my mother's got 30 some years sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and here I'm scratching my head on how to get sober. I realized that at this point, the doctors weren't going to cut it, the girlfriend wasn't going to cut it, changing the job or the school or the town wasn't going to cut it. I needed to do some action. So I get down here. um, I got a sponsor, I got a home group, I got a service commitment at this home group. um, I started going through the steps with my sponsor, and the main difference between this time and last time is the first principle: honesty. I was finally willing to get honest with somebody. I had a sponsor before the first time around, and I would call him. I remember calling him and saying, "Yeah, man," I had a drink in my hand, right about to drink, and call him like I was supposed to do. Right, I'm supposed to call my sponsor when I'm in that situation, or before I get to that situation, hopefully. Nevertheless, I talked to him. I said, "Everything's fine. I'm good." I wasn't honest. I hung up that phone, and that begin my next run. So like I said, I got down here, I got the sponsor, I got honest. I started hanging out with people that, had what I wanted, and not, the material things, um, the peace of mind, the confidence, the people that just looked like they were, happy, joyous, and free, because I was so tired of being, shackled by my alcoholism and drugs and alcohol. Um, so we started going through the steps. Like I said, at this point, I believe I'd gone through, 1, 2, and 3. I had, I knew my life was unmanageable. The credit card debt, the arrest history, the just countless, you know, events that made this clear to me at this point. And I knew that I couldn't restore me to sanity. I knew that my doctors couldn't restore me to sanity. I knew that the girlfriend couldn't, the job couldn't. So I began, I came willing to believe that something besides myself, outside of material things, could restore me to sanity. And, like I said, I was willing, so I turned my life over, to the care of the God as I understood him. I was more of a God of my misunderstanding at the beginning, but that's okay. I was just willing to believe that something could restore me to sanity, and that's what I did. Um, I hear all these things about like step 4 being like treacherous and this and that, and like that wasn't my experience. These were all things that I knew I did. I knew I had calls that it was tough to see my part in some of it. However, I took the direction of my sponsor. I put this stuff on paper. I thought about it. I looked at where I was at fault, what I could have done differently, and, established a pattern for my actions and, my choices. Um, and then, of course, sharing it with him, was, just another part of the process. What was good was the meditation afterwards. I think some of my sponsees might slack on that, and I think that that was one thing that I did that really made it clear, that these patterns, and made it so it's something I'm able to hold on to. Um, you know, Moving on, with the character defects, my- I wound up looking at, the 7 deadly sins, and kind of putting all my character defects under each, and categorizing them under one of these deadly sins. And, you know, um, it felt weird, just I'm like, humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. And I'm like, I did that, but I don't know that I was ready even to let them go when I did that. Again, I was just kind of going through the process. And today, anybody who says, that they're perfect, or they don't act out on their character defects, as far as I'm concerned, isn't being honest, because they still flare up. It's just I have the ability to acknowledge when they are, and I have the tools to put them at bay. Um, and sometimes, I don't. Sometimes I don't put them at bay, but that's okay. I'm working on it. The hardest steps for me has been the amends, and also the most freeing. I don't know if it was swallowing my pride, my ego, whatever it was that made them so difficult, and continues to make them difficult. There's still some I have to make, but man, when I was able to just do them and get them done, the feeling of, just being, relieved of, the freedom that I acquired from making these amends, and it's just amazing. That to me, it was the hardest and most rewarding step. Um, and on a daily basis, like, I continue to build my relationship. I'm not perfect with inventory. I try to, kind of do that as it comes up. I don't do it religiously at night, but I hold myself accountable to my actions these days. And, when something goes wrong, or I do something wrong, I try to correct it. Um, and then, just continuing to build that relationship. Like, I hear a lot of people say that, I stopped going to meetings before I relapsed. I stopped doing this, I stopped doing that, I stopped calling my sponsor. But in my experience, the first thing that always stops is the prayer. That's something that I knew I could get away with and nobody would know. And, again, I wanted everybody to like me, so I would keep going to meetings, this and that, in the past. But the prayer was the first thing to go in my experience. So I try to stay tight on that. I try to pray multiple times a day during the day, beginning, end of the day. I don't know, why it works, but I know that it does. So I continue to do it. Um, and like today, like life is pretty good. I'm coming up on 2 years. Like, you know, there's still stuff that comes up. I had just past week made one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make, but I didn't have to make it alone. I made it with the help of friends and my sponsor and family. I got out of a relationship that I was in for 5 years, and like I said, I mean, it's just a beautiful thing because the stuff that we have to walk through in recovery, like we don't have to do alone. I'm amazed every day. I had a guy call me the other day who wanted to get into a halfway house. I put a message out in a group message, and so many people got back to me. With suggestions of halfway houses and this and that, and another guy wanted to go to a meeting the other day in Delray. He doesn't have a car, so I put him in contact with like 7 people, that responded to my text messages, and it's just amazing to see, this program, you know, give back, um, to fellow alcoholics, and I'm honored to be a part of that, and try to, give what was given to me, away, and that's been the most rewarding part is helping others, taking guys through the steps, being there for somebody when they're going through a tough time, because I know that, you know if it's been done for me. People showed up when I needed them, so I try to show up when people need me. um again, like I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, but like I continue to to try my best, um to be a better person, to carry out God's will. And like I would confuse what like God's will was. um and like I had to have it broken down real simply for me, and a gentleman told me like it's just doing the next right thing. And because of working this program, I have this instinct that I never had before, this conscience that I never had before, that lets me know, when I am steering the wrong way, when I'm veering off path, when I'm taking my will back. And as long as I do what was taught to me through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm able to kind of steer that back into the right direction. um, yeah, man, like I said, like it's amazing, what this program is able to do for people. um, I always tell, like when I'm speaking at like detoxes and whatnot, I'm like, man, like if we would have told you there were 12 steps you had to do before you got your next fix, like you'd probably do them, and do them quickly. And like I tell these kids, like, these are 12 steps we should do to like save your life, to give you a better way of life. Like, if that's what you want, I suggest you do them. And how it works is, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed this path. And like, I now, believe that to be true. If this program is done honestly and thoroughly, it will work. I see it time and time again. It's worked in my life. It's worked in a lot of people's lives around me, and it's just, I feel so grateful to have something like this available. And I'm just going through my traditions now. Like going through the traditions has been amazing. You know, um, that's why we're still here. The traditions are what hold us together. Like somebody said, you got the first step, maybe we were powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable, and the rest of the steps are, to kind of regain that manageability. It talks about, in the traditions, it's based on, AA unity, and like the rest of the traditions are how to keep us unified. And I now see their importance, and it's been a pleasure to go through them. It's been a pleasure to be here tonight. Like Rifki, thank you for asking me to do this. This is a first, very, very cool, experience. Like I said, man, AA saved my life. I'm eternally grateful for it. And I think that's all I got. Thank you.